Welcome to another broadcast of mindyourhealthcast.com. Today we're going to continue on from the last session where we started an introduction to diet and diets and what do you want to eat. There's a lot of diets out there. Every time you turn around there's a new diet. I guess you could take your pick, or you could put them all on a piece of paper and put them in a hat, shake them up and draw out one, because in most cases that's going to be what the rationale is behind it. What is the current fad? I've been in the health field a long time, pushing 40 years, and I've seen probably about every kind of diet at one time or another, and of course there's always one or two that are the current fad. As we get into this a little bit more today, we'll talk about the fact that there's basically a lot of similarities between them. Each one tweaks it a little, and pretty much each one likes to give it their own name. But bottom line is, it really kind of shrinks down into a very few general types of diets. And then there's a few that are tweaked, that aren't fixed, but just depends on what your body's doing, what you need, and using a way to monitor what your body's doing is very good in terms of giving you a more personalized type of information and a more personalized diet. Well, first of all, we want to mention that there is going to be a live lecture at the clinic here in July. It's going to be on Saturday, July the 9th from 3 to 5 p.m. in the afternoon. We usually pick a topic each time and then answer a lot of questions. Usually plenty of time to answer questions that people may have as far as specific issues, or if they're even taking issue with what I'm saying, it's perfectly all right. Remember, I'm giving you information that's designed to provoke you to go out and look, and don't just accept what's handed, but begin to educate yourself. Probably no better time or necessary time in our health history is it important to become an educated consumer. There are so many issues that have to be dealt with in order to attempt to be healthy. I've said it before, and I'll say it again today, that there was a time when I was young that basically everyone was healthy, with the exception of something unusual coming along. And then once the person recovered, they'd be in a pretty healthy state again. But we have come to a place in our society where this is not a given anymore. If you look around, the health status of people is not better. Contrary to what we've been told, we are not really living longer or healthier. In fact, there's more chronic illness than ever. Things like cancer, that when I first studied medicine probably happened 1 in 40 or 50 people in their lifetime, now has been down to 1 in 3 for some time, and the estimates are in a short period of time it's going to be 1 in 2, which means 50% of everyone out there will develop cancer in their life. Now, for a society who supposedly is highly enlightened and highly scientific and has learned all kinds of things to produce health, it seems to me that there is a contradiction. I've heard it said actually by a hospital administrator, could not understand, in the light of all we know today about health and medicine, why people are sicker than ever. But it is a fact. There's other issues in the background which we don't have time to get into today, but even disregarding the other issues, the fact is that we are very much sicker, and we aren't really living longer. Maybe I ought to throw that in. There have been some studies done. In fact, a couple of researchers from Harvard several years ago wrote a book called The Vitality Factor. And what they decided to do, in light of a figure that is being thrown around, which is called your average life expectancy, that figure has been going up over the years, and so everyone has been assuming that new scientific medicine is helping people live longer. So these two researchers decided to go back 200 years to determine how long has the average person actually lived. Now, we're talking about something different. We're talking about actual lifespan, not average life expectancy. Now, there is a big difference. Average life expectancy is something called a probability mathematical equation. That means you set up this probability equation and you put a lot of pieces of data in it, and it depends on what kind of parameters you include in your equation. Then it will make an estimate of what could be based on the data that was put into it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's an absolute of any sort. In fact, it's just what it says. It's an average life expectancy. Now, the only problem with that is that back in 1918, when there was the mammoth flu epidemic, those death figures went into that equation, and when they started calculating the average life expectancy, I remember when it was only in the low 60s for both men and women. But the nice thing about this equation is, because of the fact that we had this big death rate from this flu, which actually skewed it off, it made it look like people were living shorter than they really were, or could expect to live shorter than they really did, because of the skewing, because of that huge number of deaths due to that flu. Now, what happens is then, with an equation like that, every year that gets away from the 1918 epidemic, the higher the life expectancy factor gets in the equation. So the fact is that if everybody did nothing, had no medicine, were treated in no way, this figure would predict that every year people would live longer, which is all it is. It's a predictor on an average of probability. Now, what's probability? That means a guess. The other factor that the two researchers found out was that way back, for the last 200 years, they were able to find records of births and deaths. And in plotting those out, guess what they found that the average lifespan has been for the last 200 years? The fact is that it shows that the average lifespan has been 85 years old, which is above all the years of this life expectancy probability factor. So the fact is that on the average, people have lived 85 years. Some higher, some over 100, and some less. But on the average, it's been about 85. And then it seems that it sharply declines after age 85. That a lot of people go downhill fast. But that seems to be the set point, at least at this point. Now, if you compare that to the average life expectancy, that hasn't even caught up to that yet. Yet they're claiming that modern medicine has increased our life, and it has not. Actually, if we listen to that, we should die less than what the last 200-year average has been. At any rate, numbers sometimes don't mean a whole lot, depending on how you set them up to measure. So, we do have a big health problem today, and diet is one of those issues. And as I say, when you go out and you look around, there is a tremendous amount of different types of diets. And in fact, about every 2 or 3 years, some new one comes along that is the current rage for a while. Everybody jumps on the bandwagon. All the sheep kind of veer off in that direction. And then after a while, it's realized that it was no different than any other of the diets before it's done. Some people felt good on it, some did not, some got worse, etc., etc. But there's a reason for that. Now, we mentioned it and laid some of the groundwork last broadcast, and don't forget to tell everybody that might have an interest in health that they should tune into our broadcast every week. Remember, it goes up at 4 p.m. on Sunday, stays there until the following Friday morning. The current streamer that we have for the program we can only have the current program on. There's no archive, so we leave it on for a week and gives people enough time to get a chance to look at it. If it's not available to you, meaning you didn't get a chance to look at it during that period of time, we do have, of course, the masters, and we are making DVDs available. So if you go to our shopping cart, you will find that they are listed there, and you can purchase them. We would like to do it for free, but unfortunately, this is a self-financed broadcast. We do not make money or have advertisers at this point, so we are footing the bill ourselves. So we will recover a little if we sell some of the DVDs or the books and so forth that we show in the broadcast, or talk about in the broadcast, which is on the site. We always keep, as much as possible, the books listed that I mentioned that are very important, and you can go there and click on. It will take you directly to Amazon. You'll get the discounted price of Amazon, and they will pay us a small commission for referring people there. It's going to be far from getting rich, but it will help finance a little bit to buy equipment and supplies and etc. to carry on the broadcast. I believe that we're introducing topics that are not typical, and we don't want them to be typical. We want them to be provocative, and we want you to think. So when we're talking diet, we want you to think that just because somebody throws an average out there and says this is great, that everybody should do it, that it doesn't work that way. I mentioned last week that probably most of the diets come about because a particular person found it worked well for them, and they immediately think it should be for everyone. And I learned a long time ago that that's not true. Now, we mentioned last week that different things make it unique for each person to have a particular diet that is specified for that particular person. In other words, it must be individualized. Now, we did mention that Dr. Roger Williams, a tremendous researcher, way ahead of his time, way back over the years, from the 50s, he published his first work, and he put out a lot of research papers, a lot of good information on individuality, and wrote the book, Biochemical Individuality. And he called it a geneotrophic concept, which means the genes of each person are different, therefore they need a different type of diet. And he did get into the idea that environment makes a bit of difference in terms of what environment you are living in or exposed to can alter what your needs might be. But he was one of the first people to get out of this idea, and when I say the first, of modern medicine and modern science, that said we need to get out of this idea that one diet is good for everyone, because some people's needs are different because of their genes and because of their life experience and so forth. It makes a difference. Now, interestingly, there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who is basically a microbiologist, cell biologist, and has taught in medical schools and done research for years, has an interesting book out called The Biology of Belief, because he talks about the fact how we are affected, even our genetic expression, by, first of all, what we've inherited and brought in with us, and then what we're exposed here. And he's done a lot of research in those areas, and especially from the emotional side, how it can alter how our bodies respond and how even our genetics respond in terms of expression, which means that if you're exposed to a lot of stress, and have a lot of emotional issues, some of the genes that are not so good for you may get expressed, and some of the good genes that would counter some of those problems do not get expressed. And also the chemicals that we're exposed to in our environment. He, as well as some other doctors now, are into something called epigenetics, and we'll mention that in a little while. But that's another variable that enters in that makes a difference, even how our genes express, and therefore how our health is. So, we mentioned and asked the question a little bit. We're going to get into a little bit more is, first of all, then, how are we going to find out what kind of diet that we need? Well, as they say, first of all, I think that Williams, which would be really worthwhile getting his book. It's not a big, thick book, but lays out the idea that even physically we have different shaped stomachs, different shaped kidneys, livers, and so forth, even though everybody has one, unless medicine has gotten a hold of them and taken it out. They all have two kidneys and a liver and lungs and all these organs. But they're different. Some people, their adrenals are much larger, and therefore they function different than people who have smaller adrenals. And some people have a larger pancreas and some a smaller pancreas, some a larger stomach and some a smaller stomach. And so that's the very first thing that we have to take into consideration, that we physically are different. But then chemistry-wise we are too, because a lot of the chemistry has some genetic factors related to it. And if you're born with a defect, and when I say a defect, that means you don't have a particular gene, or your gene has somehow become distorted in the process over the centuries, then you may have problems. Now, I didn't mention it the last week, but there is a study and a way of mapping genes that's out that's called SNPs. Actually, it means single nucleotide polymorphism, or SNP for short, and so they threw an I in to make it more pronounceable and then call it a SNP. Now the SNPs code for certain things, especially for the liver enzymes and liver detox pathways. And what they found out, and now the pharmaceuticals have realized this is a big problem, that's why if your family background did not get a lot of exposure to toxic things, you may not have the SNPs that produce the right information to the liver to handle certain kind of poisons that are foods in our environment today. And so those could become a problem to you. Now, what the pharmaceuticals have found out is that if you don't take the SNPs into consideration, one person taking a particular drug could die from it because they had no capability of breaking it down. Whereas another genetic line, the people have those enzymes and the detox pathways that can break it down and metabolize it out so it will not build up toxic. So just keep that in mind. If your body cannot break it down or cannot detox it, then if you're taking daily doses of a drug, it can build up to the toxic level pretty fast and can become fatal. And see, before they knew that happened, but they had no idea why. Now they kind of have an idea why. And so you will see in some of the drug monographs now, they're saying if you have or don't have these particular SNPs, then you should not take the drug. The doctor should find that out and should not give you that drug because it can become fatal, or at least make you deathly sick if it doesn't kill you. So it's very important that we know that. Now, it's interesting because the second group of people, apart from Dr. Williams, that I think have done the biggest job are Richard and Laura Powers, who found out that the blood types cause you to have a certain type of antibodies that come in the genes with the blood type. That means these antibodies are already programmed so that if you get something in your body that they are antibodies against, you're going to get a reaction. And so it doesn't make any difference. You've never been exposed to the food before. And in food in particular is what they were looking at. They found that each of the blood types have this problem that certain foods do well with that blood type and certain foods don't. And so they have done a tremendous amount of work typing not only the blood types but how the foods react. So that means that a perfectly good food, as far as a good organically grown food, grown in good soil, very healthy bit of food, could be very good for one person but very bad for another. Now that prompted a doctor many years ago, a naturopath by the name of Dr. James D'Adamo, to write a book called One Man's Food is Another Man's Poison. So he was one of the early people that got into the idea. He wasn't the first one, because I found out that in Germany and other areas of Europe they had been kind of tuned into this for a while. Anyhow, but he wrote this book and it never hit very big. I have a copy of it in my library, but it was never a big seller. And I don't think people wanted to think that they could not eat whatever they wanted to eat and that it could be a real health problem. So if you can find his book, it would be good. Now later, a few years ago, his son Peter D'Adamo wrote a book which became a big hit. He got the right book out at the right time called Eat Right for Your Type, and it was based on some of the ideas his father had worked on, and so he tried to take it a step further. Now, I have to say he's a very good merchandiser, and he's turned it into a real big business of books and products and so forth, which is nothing wrong with it, except that his way of choosing I didn't think were good, or at least as good as they could be, for what types of food to eat. His information in his book, which if you haven't read, it would be good to read, his information is very good telling you why the blood types make a difference in terms of the foods that your body could eat. Now you have to keep in mind that foods are having, all of them have protein. Now in the human body and in the animal body, proteins are the most likely things to be toxic to you within the realm of poisons. Snakes' venoms, spider venoms, and so forth, all these venoms are what are called proteins. That means there are chains of amino acids that are arranged in a certain way that when they get in your body, they create a problem. Now, they're usually enzymes. And you know what an enzyme is. An enzyme is a molecule made up of several amino acids that acts as an accelerator or intensifier of some type of an action. If you haven't studied much about enzymes, it's not a bad idea to get in. There's some popular books out on it. Dr. Howell, H-O-W-E-L-L, did many years of research about enzymes in the human body and what kind of enzymes are good, what they do in the body, how you can enhance them. Now, the second group that did a big study on enzymes were the pharmaceutical companies and food processors, because especially the food processors wanted to put out a food that had a long shelf life. And they found out that there's enzymes that come naturally in the foods, and if they are left there, they will actually break the food down fast, because that's their job. Enzymes do one of two things. They either put molecules together or they break them apart. And in our system, our digestive enzymes break things apart. And in particular with the proteins, there's two steps. We've talked about it before. The stomach, where the first level of protein digestion takes place, the hydrochloric acid and pepsin breaks down these big complex protein molecules of amino acids into peptide chains. A peptide chain is a group of amino acids, but not a full protein molecule. Then it goes into the small intestine, where it's completed and broken down into individual amino acids, which we have to have in our body for, number one, what? To rebuild the body. Our muscles wear out and so forth, so we have to rebuild the structure. Number two, to build enzymes so we can digest our food, and other factors that are carried on in the chemistry, repair, energy production, and so forth of the body all require enzymes, because enzymes accelerate or intensify some type of chemical action. Otherwise, they would be so slow in our body that we would never get enough energy produced to do much of anything. So we need the enzymes to accelerate or facilitate these processes. So at any rate, the food processors found that if they deactivate, which means either overheating or doing something chemically, and break down these enzymes, then the food will sit on the shelf longer and won't go bad. So it became more profitable for them to understand enzymes. So Dr. Howe did it in a favorable way for humans, and the food processors did it in a detrimental way. It looked nice, but it's dead, and it doesn't want to break down, but then our body has to work harder to do that. Nature included enzymes in all the plants and all the things that we eat, so that when we eat them, they help in the process of breaking it down. But if you deactivate those, then the body has to do the total job itself. And Dr. Howe found it interesting that humans have the largest pancreas of any of the animals, because we eat, he thinks, because we eat all this denatured food that causes the body to have to work a lot harder to produce a lot more enzymes to try to break it down, compared to animals like dogs, which eat more raw things therefore the enzymes are intact, and pretty much all the animals, we have the largest pancreas for body size of any of the animals, and basically he believes it has developed because of the fact that we have gone to bad food, or at least denatured food. So at any rate, we need this food, we need to break it down, and the proteins can be problematic because, as I mentioned, snake venoms are enzymes that are made of protein chains. Spider venoms are the same, and a lot of the poisons that get in our body are protein in nature. When we get an anaphylactic reaction, a terrible allergic reaction that could be fatal, it's to the proteins in something that we have eaten that this reaction occurs from. So it's important then to understand that if you inherit in your blood type certain antibodies, that means that every time you put that food in your system, those antibodies are going to react against it. Now, sometimes it's not enough to incapacitate you, but it could be enough to cause bad skin problems. It could be enough to give you terrible headaches. It could be enough to make you feel extremely tired and worn out, having muscle or joint aches and pains and so forth. So there's a lot of things can come as a result of it. Sometimes it's a reaction because there's different types of immune reaction. Sometimes that reaction doesn't occur until 1 or 3 days after you've eaten the food. Not good, because then you don't associate the two together. But I can tell you that the two major blood types in this country are type A and type O. There's 43% on the average that type out O's and about 41% type out A's. That means about 84% of the people are either A's or O's. Now, dairy is not good for either of those. Dr. Powers, that I mentioned earlier, he and Laura did all these studies at a big clinic in Maryland for years and have checked thousands of people by doing blood tests. And dairy is a big problem, whether it's straight milk, cheese, or other byproducts from the dairy. They provoke a reaction. Now, some people think it's lactose, which is milk sugar, but I don't believe that's the big problem. The big problem is the calcium caseinate, which is a big protein molecule with calcium on it. That, in my mind, is the big problem, is this big protein molecule. And so all these people, we got 84% of the people are going to react to it. Now, the bad thing is that when you're young, you can tolerate this stuff, and you don't realize that it's a problem. So you keep putting it in and putting it in, but in the meantime, the place the big reaction occurs is in the small intestine. You begin to damage the small intestine over time because of this ongoing allergic reactions that are taking place in the bowel tract. At the beginning, you don't realize it. Other than the fact you might notice if you ate a big dish of ice cream, maybe you don't feel a little not up to par, and you think, well, it's just maybe because it's got sugar in it, and that's probably making me tired, and that's all. But it's really the protein reaction to that caseinate in the milk. So right away, we've got 84% of the people are going to be reacting to that. Now, when it comes to diets usually that are used in this, if you look at all the diets out there, you're going to find that usually they're either going to be high in protein, low in carbohydrates, or they're going to be high in carbohydrates and low in protein. So that means that I know that type A blood is the only blood type that can be a true vegetarian, meaning never eat meat, never eat eggs, never eat dairy, only eat fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and some of the grains, and do fine with it. But I know that type O cannot do that. I know that type O happens to be a carnivore. Meaning, Dr. Powers, getting back to him again, he traveled the world as a medical anthropologist and studied the origin of the blood types and the type of foods over the centuries that were available. Now, as long as everybody stayed in their area, they were fine. But if once they started to migrate to other areas or intermarry with other blood types, they started to create a problem. And so now we have kind of a mix-up in the world. For example, I'm a type A blood. Now, Type A happens to be a dominant gene, so if you get an A gene from either parent, it's going to type out right away as dominant. And if you happen in an unusual situation to get an A from one parent and a B from another, then you will type out as an AB because both are dominant. Okay, so that makes a big difference what you have inherited. In my particular case, I'm an A, but I have a genotype O also, so I'm an AO. That means that primarily I follow an A diet, but I could occasionally get away with a little high quality protein like meat or something, but as long as I did not overdo it. But if I eat much red meat or pork or any wild game meat, my body reacts to it and I don't feel well. And when you say you don't feel well, it's not just that there's some symptoms, but it's actually damaging the small intestine. We don't have time to get into it, but every time you eat food that you shouldn't eat, it provokes an immune reaction inside the small intestine, and lining the small intestine are what are called villi and microvilli, where all the absorption has to take place. If you damage that over time, it actually shrinks away. And I mentioned before that I know of a case with a physiologist who had a section across the small intestine and looked at it and said it looked like a clean water pipe. Now, a good small intestinal cross-section should be lined with villi and microvilli to absorb all your nutrients like it's supposed to. Well, that's been ruined because the person ate the wrong stuff over time until it totally destroyed all the villi and the microvilli, and of course this person was dead. That's where he got the section. So you don't want that to happen, and eating a lot of the wrong things are going to cause that to happen. Now, I realize it's not simple because there's some other things about it that we don't have time to get into today. In fact, there's a lot of variables that go in. Our world is so mixed up today because of all the migration and traveling to different areas and intermarrying with different groups of people. So you have quite a mixture of things. So you almost have to start out with a basic idea what a type O blood should eat, and then over time you have to tweak it. Now there's some tests you can do to check that out. You can do some blood tests and see if there's any further things that are a problem. But there's some biochemical tests that you can do, and there's some typing you can do. Now the Powers went a little further, and they actually just did some research with some work done by a dentist and some other people who realized that dominant and recessive glands in the body make a big difference in the diet. Okay, so now the Powers came up and they developed a nice typing system and researched it out. They've actually written some research papers on it. And they developed something they call biotypes. And there's 8 types, which is a combination of the blood type plus the type of gland that is dominant in a particular person. So they came up with things like the gonads, which are the sex glands, which would be the ovaries in women and testes in men. If you're a gonadal type person, then there's certain characteristics. And certain blood types usually fall. For example, I know that gonadal are usually type O blood. And it has a lot to do with the morphology. What does your body do? What kind of a shape does it take? And so in the glandular typing, that's something you look for. And it's very interesting. On their website, they have some information about the biotypes, and they do actually have a questionnaire that you can answer, and it will give you an inkling of what your dominant blood type is. Now, with each dominant, there's certain recessive things can occur, and so it's important that you look into the whole concept and make this at least one factor, because when you're talking diet and you're talking nutritional support, which incidentally there's no way you cannot have nutritional support today, because there are so many many factors out there that make a difference. You have to take all that in consideration, and as I say, I mentioned about the stress and some other things, and we're going to mention again all the things that are very important to come up with a program with a particular person. But on the powers approach, which is getting back to the unique idea, and at any rate, what I'm going to do, I'll just mention real fast through these. So we're going to go through them and just tell you the different of the 8 biotypes that they have, and give you an idea what you might want to consider. Okay, the biotypes, we want to just kind of give you a feel for it. And so the biotypes that were developed by the Powers actually was based on a lot of previous studies, not just them. But they did some specific research studies on it, and they have a book coming out that will go into it in detail. It has not been released yet. You know, always fine-tuning. It's hard when you're doing books based on breakthrough areas to get that book up to where you want it, and you're sure you've got everything in there you want to have in it by the time you put it in press, because you don't want to have to turn around and revise it as soon as it's printed. So they've been slow in doing it. I studied with them originally many, many years ago, and they were going to put out a book many, many years ago, and it hasn't gotten out yet. So they have 2 books that are coming out, one just on the biotypes, and they have one on the whole concept of putting it all together and including the blood type. So their glandular types that they typed with people are looking for overactive glands, and the overactive glands change or affect the morphology of the body. To give you an example, here's what they're saying, that it is a powerful system for dealing with stress, reducing aging and disease, and maximizing your unique genetic potential. Now, getting back to the idea that, like Dr. Roger Williams talked about, everybody is unique. It's not a diet typing system per se. Learn how to best balance your hormones, identify your strongest and weakest endocrine hormone-producing glands to get a personal profile. Based on the latest science and analytical research, discover key foods and supplements that contain revitalizing nutrients based on what you need, and recover your health and become the perfect you. Now that's what they're saying that they plan to do out of it. So once you learn about that, you can make application to that. Now they have it broken down, as I said, into each of the types, and you can go on their site if you wanted to do it now, which is www.biotype.net/types, and you can fill out the information that they're going to ask, and it will then give you an outline of the different glands and which one or ones really stand out. Now, I can tell you it does involve a couple of physical measurements, because the original typing system all had to do with measurement. They want to find out something about your bone structure, size of your head, and so forth, which is all important in which of those types you are. So I mentioned before, the first is the gonad type. And so they talk about the emotional, mental, social, and physical aspects of each of these types. And if you go on the site, you're going to see that they actually show what the physical body would look like. Now, on the gonad type, which is ovaries and testes, they have the female gonad types and the male gonad types. And so you're going to see some illustrations of those on there in color. They're kind of cute. They're not total cartoon, but they're kind of cartoon-like. And you're also going to see that they're going to tell you what the health risks are related to that type. For example, the gonad type, under prolonged stress, may experience weight variation plus or minus 20 pounds, water retention, buttock pimples, women only, endometriosis, PMS, vaginitis, pelvic and breast cysts, and fibroid tumors. That's what they're going to be inclined to develop. Men only, going to have male pattern baldness and prostate problems. Those are what the men are likely to have. They often have, along with that, a recessive liver function, which means they're going to have digestive problems. They could develop a fatty or toxic liver and probably have gallstones or gallbladder problems. And usually the pineal gland is recessive, which means they have poor self-awareness, low interest in cognitive activity, and seasonal depression. Many become toxic or overwhelmed by sexual tension and overindulge in sex, causing inflammation of reproductive organs. And then they talk about what type of therapies are going to be good. They need more B complexes, they need more potassium, glutathione, iron for women, sal palmetto for men. They need to take glandulars, which are glandular products made from healthy glands of liver, pineal, and also melatonin. And their exercise should be moderate, and they should engage, and probably do like to engage in outdoor activities. So they even talk about how the different hormones are either high or low that maybe need supported. So that was the first type, was the gonadal. Then they have the pancreas type, and I had kind of mentioned that before in the last broadcast. But the pancreas type is the one that's, from the time they're young, they're going to have a bit of a weight problem. And as time goes on, it's going to get worse. They are going, it says here, physical, chronically overweight since childhood, may be obese, round face, may be near average weight with exercise. Emotionally, they either are highly social, jolly, and cheerful, or sluggish, depressed, and hungry, get satisfaction from eating. So they do tend to have this idea that eating is going to solve problems, and of course the more they eat, the more problem they create, and then it's not solving their problem. Social, they enjoy food shopping, preparation and eating and entertainment, preferably with supportive family or community. And mental-wise, survival intelligence, folk on filling the needs of self, others in the community, ranges from quite intelligent to forgetful, depending on the secondary type. Now, it talks about their health risks. You could probably guess, if you're thinking about the pancreas being dominant, severe obesity, diabetes, high cholesterol, triglycerides, high blood pressure, and heart disease. And I mentioned with the recessive liver, could be digestive, fatty, and toxic liver, and gallbladder type problems. And also they can sometimes have recessive thyroid, leading to slow metabolism, slow mentality, and osteoporosis. May get caught in an unhealthy cycle of dieting and binging with even more weight gain over time. Now, they need B supplements, the whole B complex, trace minerals, glutamine, and chromium. And plus their glandular should be liver and thyroid. And interestingly, when you study the glands in a deeper way, and organs, you know that each organ has a related gland. We talked about that in Chinese medicine. And so the related gland is going to be to liver is thyroid. So if the liver is down, then there's going to be some thyroid issues because the two of them work together. And then when you talk about the hormones related to that, you know there are going to be problems with insulin and glycagon, which is one of the signalers from the pancreas for the liver to re-release sugar back into the blood when it's needed. And some leptin problems that have to do with weight and control of weight. So you can see how important this becomes in terms of making something individualistic. So there's 8 biotypes I told you. The next one is adrenal. I'm not going to go into each of these individually, but just tell you how far it went. You had adrenal, thymus gland. Now, thymus is interesting because, again, the physical traits, thymus people tend to be tall and lanky with long limbs and face, high immunity against disease, but often a lot of allergies, and they are delayed in developing in puberty when they're young. They tend to sometimes be shy or reserved, exceptionally charming and funny. Most are quite spontaneous and impulsive. Only saying how these affect each aspect of your life. The next one is thyroid. Not going to go into that, except that thyroid people, if the thyroid is dominant, tend to be more slender with small hard bones and delicate features, high metabolism, quick but exhaust easily. so it's kind of interesting if you're putting it together a program, what it may take for each individual if you look at the glandular typing also. Okay, pituitary is the next one of the 8. Physical, water retention, forehead larger than cheekbones, can focus intently and drive the body to exhaustion. So, as I mentioned, when they're doing the typing, there's 2 measurements you make with the width of the head, the width of the jaw, and also with the bicep and the wrist, and those measurements are going to be different for each of the gland types. Pineal gland, that's the 7th of the group. Cheekbones are wider than forehead, which pituitary is just the opposite, that the forehead's wider than the cheek. Often short with a youthful appearance, and so forth. So pineal people are interesting. Now, I don't know that they're saying here, but they probably do. I know from way back, yeah, they tend to be intuitive, psychic, tend to have hunches in advance about things that are going to happen. So they're very interesting people. And of course, the last of the 8 is a balanced type. Now, they say if you have at least 4 or 5 strong glands, or more overactive or highly active, then you're probably more balanced, and so you're not going to find one that really stands high and the rest all down. Very good system, and I'm looking forward to their book coming out. But when I took the program many years ago with them, they did cover the glandular typing as part of the program. So just to show you how you can individualize based on blood type and the biotype and bring it all together. And then they're going to tell you in here too, and I don't have time to get into that, how each of the blood types figure with these biotypes with the gland. Now, another thing that's helpful with all of this is that many years ago, there was a gentleman, actually out of Orlando, Florida. His name was Dr. Kerry Reams, and somewhere around the late 40s, early 50s, he got heavily involved. He saw somebody dying, close friend, and he had studied biochemistry and a lot about diet and nutrition and pathology, etc., etc. And so he become distraught about how can I figure out a way that can help people, because even back then, medicine, as much as everybody thought they were solving all the problems, there was a lot more illnesses, and a lot of times the people didn't recover. So he got very interested and wanted to apply some of the things he studied in Europe and Germany and so forth previous to this. And so he was also somewhat of a religious individual, and he believed at a certain point that God gave him a formula for what would be a perfectly balanced body. So I'm just going to show you real fast what that formula is. I don't know how well you can see it on there, but if you look at the far my right, you're going to see that 1.5 is the first digit on this formula, and 1.5 has to do with actually carbohydrate metabolism. On the other extreme end, you see a 3 over a 3, and that has to do with the protein metabolism. And then in between, you've got a couple of pHs, one for the saliva, one for the urine. You've got a conductivity for the urine. The 1.5 number came from the urine, so did not the 3s. In other words, you're measuring the outthrow from the body. And this is cellular debris, this little 0.04. The 6C is conductance, which has to do with also the amount of ions that are being dumped out through the urine. So it's urine and saliva test, basically, which is what it sometimes was referred to. Sometimes it was referred to as the Reams test. Sometimes it was referred to as the theory of biological ionization. And then now sometimes they abbreviate it with an R for Reams, B for biological, I for ionization, T for test. That's one of the ways that they might refer to it. And there are still people that do it. In my practice, I learned this many, many years ago. I studied with Dr. Reams' son-in-law. He was still alive when I first started learning it, but he later has expired and has for a while now. But he started out here in Orlando, and utilizing this, he started working with people to bring their body back into balance. So as he did that, he would retest them, and then he would tweak their diet to see how it affected all these things. So it was quite interesting how it worked, and as I said, I had very good success. I think I probably did maybe 2,000 or 3,000 tests on people with it over time. Takes a few minutes in the office to measure the various factors and then calculate out. But one of the big things that I thought was intriguing about it, there's a way of calculating something called metabolic energy, meaning what your current energy status is, and reserve energy. Now, the reserve energy was a type of energy that's your deeper background energy and kind of, in a sense, your time clock for your body. Now, what he found out was that if you go downhill, you reach a certain point in your reserve energy where it starts to go downhill faster. And that was called an exponential rate of decline. And if you continue to go down, you hit something called the PNR, point of no return. And when you hit that, it was about 22.5% reserve energy. When you hit that point, you're close to death. That means that if the body has saved enough energy to return itself back to dust at that 22.5%, so that's it. That's the shutoff point. So we worked with people who were down pretty close to that before, but as we turned their health around, the numbers all came up. And it's, as I say, it's based on this equation. I thought it worked very well, and we got a lot of people well by utilizing this and tweaking it with diet and fasting and good water and good food, and then tweaking it with supplements and so forth. So it was a way of individualizing the diet. It was not, as we said earlier, one of those diets where, such as the zone diet that's out there by Barry Sears. It's a good diet for type O blood people because it's high protein, low carbohydrate. And then, as I say, we have the other groups of diets which are like it used to be, and I don't know if they changed it or not, but some of the ones out are high in carbohydrate and lower in protein. And so generally there's a few that go to the extreme each way and say, well, no carbohydrates at all and eat high protein. That's the real extreme. And of course the other real extreme is you eat all fruits and vegetables, and you can eat a lot of carbohydrates but low or no protein. So you see all these extremes and all these steps in between. But each person, in the long run, and my work with people is we start out to begin with, especially with the blood type diet, and kind of get them going, and then there's ways of tweaking that or adjusting it so that we can get the best diet. You need some way to measure it. This test of Dr. Reams was a good way to do it. And of course the other one that could tell you health-wise where you're going is the one which Dr. Morell from Germany used a lot, which is the BEV, bioelectronic Vincent, which now has been changed to BE-T-A, which is biological terrain analysis. I mean, bottom line, that's what it is. And one of the people who build equipment in this country to do the same test called it BTA, biological terrain analysis. And then later it was changed to quantitative fluid analysis. But bottom line is you're measuring protons, electrons, and ions in the body fluids in general, which means blood, urine, and saliva, as opposed to this one, which is all basically done from the urine and just the pH of the saliva, kind of giving you an indication of where the person was. I have to say, using the Reams, that we got a lot of people well, and they did very well with it. With the Vincent, I think it's probably better aimed at staying into a health zone away from pathology, because as you deviate from that, you are moving towards some pathology, so it works very well. There are some interesting diets out there. You know, the government has put out some things. The big one that they put out, of course, is now, and it was just mentioned on TV the other day, is a DASH diet. You can go on and look it up, primarily for hypertension and so forth, but they're kind of basing it on some general things, and it's not really very specific because, in general, medicine has been of the indication, eat a lot of good food of all kinds, and you don't have to take supplements, and that should do it. And they're not very specific, it's very generalized. And bottom line is, I guess, it's a eat what you want diet and hope for the best. If you look at the health condition of people today, you begin to think, well, it's not working for the best because they're not doing so well. But I hope I'm trying to get across to you, as I'm trying to really, get across to you that it's nothing is that simple when it comes to diets. And any of these quirky ones, whether it would be the pH, I mentioned that last time. There's one fellow that, the doctor, is heavy on the pH thing. And I've had one of my books in my library is called Alkalize or Die. Now they've got some units coming out from Japan that they're wanting people to buy drinking highly alkalized water. And if you remember the last time I mentioned that even within the cell of the body there's probably at least 5 to 7 different pH ranges that are required, all the way from 5, which is highly acid, to about 7.2 to 7.4, which is slightly on the alkaline side. But you will see that more often than not, is like in this program by Dr. Reams, it was 6.4 for the saliva, 6.4 for the urine. The BEV system runs just about the same as that and puts the blood at slightly alkaline at 7.2 to 7.3 for venous blood. So it's interesting that there's a lot of ways you can measure where the person is and if what they're doing is working well or not working well, if they're developing serious problems, and we're going to be doing a program just on that. What are the ways that we can measure right now today to give you the information you need to say, okay, is what I'm doing working or am I going downhill? Because there's become more and more interest now in anti-aging or longevity. How can I live longer and how can I live healthy? So it really all runs together if you're going to do it. But for the dietary side, just forgetting all the other things, the dietary, I wanted to impress, and I'm going to sum up real fast. I know we're running out of time, as usual. I guess you either talk too much or the time goes too fast. I'm trying to figure out which it is. Maybe it's because I talk too fast. Or too fast. Too much, too fast. And I could keep on talking. Some people say I could talk all night. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe I have on a few occasions. Okay, just remember, we're all individual. Dr. Roger Williams proved that both physically and genetically and also environmentally. That the blood type and body morphology do mean a lot in terms of coming up with a particular program for a particular person. There's different ways of monitoring it. The BEV I mentioned is one, the bioelectronic assault, or the Reams test is another one that's a good way to monitor or measure where you are and see if it's working. We need to be aware, and we touched on it a little bit last time, that the life that you have within the uterus, both emotionally and physically, make a big difference of what, when you come into the world, that you may be wrestling with. If you were deprived of nutrients within the uterus, you may then be born and have problems that have developed that are going to require a different dietary regimen than someone that did not happen to. And that's not even considering blood type and so forth. That's just the environmental and emotional part of the environmental. The other is that even after you're born, what kind of stress and what kind of food you get are going to make a big difference. Environmental factors, the diet that is available to you as you grow up, and also the amount of stress that you have in your life is going to make a big difference. And the other, epigenetics, which we kind of mentioned before, which is something you inherit from your family, is not part of the genes, but influence the way the genes express themselves, either good or bad. I mentioned to you a book by Dr. Dawson Church, PhD, called The Genie and the Genes. It would really be worthwhile getting into that and reading it along with Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief. Those will tell you a lot about some of these environmental and emotional stresses and how they affect your health. I think we've come to the end of the broadcast again. I want you to be sure, and as I said, tell other people. It's at freedocast.com/mindyourhealthcast, or you can go directly to mindyourhealthcast.com, which is our major site, and you can click from that right to the show. We also have almost launched now another site that's going to be specific for the clinic, and it will be alternative health and prevention, but you'll be able to click it directly from the Mind Your Health site, so people who want to know more about what we do clinically and working with people and some of the other details will be able to get on Mind Your Health Cast, find out all about the broadcast, find out about going to the broadcast, and also go to the site that will give much more information about the clinical side of what we do here, how we apply all these things that we're talking to you about now. So I guess we come to the end of the cast. Go to our forum, leave your comments, what you don't like, what you do like, what your questions are, what you'd like to hear or have me talk about. And also be sure and register when you go to the site if you've never been there before. We want you to register as a guest so that we can notify you by email of the coming up subjects or if there's anything special happening. You will find information about this lecture that's going to be live at the clinic here coming up on the 9th of July in the afternoon on a Saturday from 3 to 5 that will talk an awful lot about what really constitutes health. I guess that's the end of the line. Until our next broadcast, it was nice to be with you again.